The British Asian is a de facto refugee, a stateless person. And I would have thought when it seemed that governments were unable to coordinate or formulate any kind of policy on this issue, then international organizations or UN organizations should have looked at this. But this is becoming a case of a forgotten people.
East African Airways Flight 720 from Nairobi arrives at London Airport at 8:30 a.m. The freedom to travel is something most Englishmen take for granted. There were 57 passengers on board this flight, most of them just tired after an 8-hour journey, but 2 of them frightened of what lay ahead. Our British passports command all and sundry to allow the bearer to travel without let or hindrance. That is, all except East African Asians. Without the necessary entry permits, a clause in the 1968 Immigration Act has devalued their passports. Vrajlal Kakad and Navnit Ramnia know only too well that they're trapped by the situation, even though they are British citizens.
Yes, our passports were taken by the East African Airways service in Nairobi because we have been expelled from Uganda, Bujumbura, in Burundi and in Tanzania. We had no entry permit in Britain, and we have been traveling without entry permit all over the places in East Africa. And we have, I'm originally resident of the Uganda, and I have applied for vouchers since last year, October 1969. And the voucher, I couldn't obtain the voucher. Since then, I have been trying with explaining my desperate conditions to the British High Commission in Kampala, but there is no response to my explanation, as well as and we had another problem.
An official hustles away Mr. Kakad and Mr. Ramnia for the process of formal rejection by this country. The 1968 Immigration Act has created 2 classes of British citizen, those born in Britain, mostly white, and those born abroad, mostly coloured. Yet even though they're citizens and passport holders, these 2 are classed as illegal immigrants and are not allowed to stay. They're not allowed back into East Africa either. They've become shuttlecocks in a bureaucratic game. According to the International Commission of Jurists, there are at least 175,000 Asians in East Africa affected by the 1968 Act. Those who try almost hopelessly to come and are turned back have become a new airborne class of stateless person.
We have charter flight departure scenes like these almost nightly. Between now and Thursday, organisers are going to try and lay on more and more charters. And already I've heard in some cases the price is going up. But many people now don't care what they pay as long as they get away. Some are even flying out by way of West Africa. Many fear that if they wait, they may technically become stateless through Britain's action. And every one of those departing has a full British passport.
A common enough sight in this country today, a group of Asians at dinner, but two guests at this dinner party left for England illegally. Conditions in East Africa became so bad that they jumped the official queue and left for England without entry permits. Since the 1968 Act, more than 1,000 have fled. Often they've had to leave behind their wives and children. They hoped that once they were settled, their relations would be able to join them. Ramnik Varu used to be a teacher in Uganda. A year after the government withdrew his permission to work, he left his young wife and baby to come to England.
There are some families really, it's very difficult to leave them, and they are really, some of them have decided to just commit suicide because of this problem. India is not taking them because naturally India won't take, because they are British passport holders. Though they are Asians, but they are not going to take them, and British is not going to take them, and even Uganda is not going to. So which country is going to take them? That's the problem. You know, people are worried like anything.
You've left your wife behind?
Yes, I left my wife behind due to the same reason, you know.
How's she managing?
I send here from here some amount, say every fortnight I send to her, and my salary is around about £20 a week, and I send some amount to them, and for my wife, my daughter, and my father, who is 80 years old and who is dependent of me. So it is also very difficult for me to maintain myself here in England. I cannot afford expense both in Uganda as well as in England.
What were you doing in Uganda before you left?
I was a fine art teacher for last 5 years in the Ministry of Education. I was employed by the Ministry of Education. I was teaching Senior 4, Senior 3, Senior 2 classes.
And what are you doing in Leicester?
I'm an ordinary bus conductor, and I'm also a commercial artist. I went to many firms for the job of my own choice, but wherever I went, I was let down. They say they want to see that I'm experienced, that I got experience of England. I say, look, I got experience, but I gained in Uganda. But you can see my standard of work; it is as good as here.
Many of these people have gone to desperate ends to get to England. They've hitchhiked across Europe. Fortunes have been made out of their despair. Ramnik Varu and his friend Babu, like any other British citizens wanting to come to England, bought air tickets. But their journey took not hours or days, but weeks. In Athens they were rerouted to Belgrade. From there they went by train and boat to Dover, only to be rejected here, and so back again to Belgrade. There they and 95 other Asians camped outside the British Embassy. It was useful propaganda for the communists. It caused acute embarrassment to the British Embassy. Under pressure, the British government eventually allowed Ramnik Varu and his companions to continue their trek towards England.
Now from Yugoslavia, we stayed 1 or 2 days. Then we again got railway ticket from Yugoslavia up to Dover. But again, we were caught in Austria by authorities. They say, "Are you coming from East Africa?" We say, "Yes." Okay, out. They all took out, at 2:30 from the train. And then we had no other. I said, "Why? We are all going to England. We are British passport." They said, "No, I know you are British passport, but you out." We were all out of the train.
Such journeys from East Africa to London have cost many Asians their life savings. So instead of arriving with enough money to keep themselves until they could find work, they've arrived destitute with no job and nowhere to live. The official British solution to this problem has been, and still is, to put them in jail. They'll not be readmitted to East Africa, where they are neither wanted nor can find work. Anwar Ladakh broke the law by coming to England without a permit. Without charge or trial, he was sent to prison. Did they tell you how long you would be kept in prison for?
No, we were never told.
Did anybody from outside come to visit you?
No, nobody did.
It must have been very worrying.
Yes, it was.
At the time you were in prison, what did you think was likely to happen to you?
I never knew, because nobody told me anything about it.
How long were you afraid you might stay in prison for?
I asked some of the prisoners, they told me that I might have to wait for 3 months. But I just stayed for 25 days.
And this was just because you happened to come from Uganda with a British passport, not because you'd broken a law here?
Yeah.
In cities like Leicester, whether they arrive legally or illegally, the immigrants from East Africa have drifted into the Asian communities. There's little practical help for them, often only the brief comfort of being among their own people. The problems of language and customs are obvious enough, but the 1968 Immigration Act has had even more distressing problems for many families. Mrs. Amlani and her 4 sons, aged 14, 12, 8 and 5, rent a terraced house in Leicester. She cannot speak English and can't find a job. Her social life is restricted to the local temple. There are no figures for the numbers of East African Asian women who've come to England alone or with their children. Many are exempted from the clause in the 1968 Act, which makes entry permits a condition for most East African immigrants. Few speak English or are qualified for any kind of job. There is little even the leaders of the Asian community can hope to do to help either them or their children. The children and Mrs. Amlani are British subjects. A clause in the complicated regulations allowed her and her 4 sons to come to Britain, but not her husband. He holds a British passport, but before he's allowed to come to Britain, he must take his chance in the queue for a voucher. Only 1,500 vouchers are issued every year. There's a waiting list of 7,000 people wanting to escape from countries where there's not only no work, but little hope. The father of this family applied for a voucher in 1969, and he's still waiting. He can't get a permit to work in Kenya. He's not allowed to come here to earn a living, so his family exists on national assistance. Perhaps even worse, they must try to understand a foreign and not always sympathetic country without his help. The children even have schooling difficulties.
We didn't find a school for 6 months. So we waited for the education department to send, so that after 6.5 months, they didn't give us school, so that we went every day over there that we need school, so that they gave us. Otherwise they were not giving us.
Did they give you any reason for not giving you a school?
No, they didn't.
What did they say?
They said there are no places in the school.
In any school?
Yeah.
Would it be possible at all for your mother to find work here in Leicester?
તમને એમ થાય કે તમને કઈ કામ મળી જાય એમ છે?
કે પેલા મારે ઇંગ્લિશ શીખવું પછી કામ કરવાનું ટ્રાય કરવી છે. મારા ફાધર આવે ને એટલે.
My mother wants to learn English first, then she wants to go to work.
Yes. What is your mother doing about learning English?
તમે ઇંગ્લિશ શીખવા માટે શું કરો છો?
કે અત્યારે કે નથી કરતા. મારા બાપની વાત જોઈએ છે કે મારા બાપ આવે ને પછી કે ના આપણે રોડ સ્કૂલ ખોલી ત્યાં જશે કે હમણાં અમને મૂકીને જવાનું મન નથી થતું.
She ain't going now because my father is not here, and she's afraid of us that something might happen when she goes for learning English.
So she's not going to classes because she doesn't want to leave you alone?
Yeah.
Does your mother feel resentful towards the British government for not allowing your father to come to this country, or towards the Kenyan government for not allowing him to work in Kenya where you could have all lived?
એટલે તમને કોની માથે વધારે ગુસ્સો? કેન્યાના ગવર્મેન્ટ માથે કે અહીંયા બ્રિટિશના ગવર્મેન્ટે પપ્પાને આવવા નથી દેતા અને કેન્યા વાળા ઓલાને વર્ક પરમિટ નથી આપતા?
એ ખબર નથી પડતી કે અહીંયા લોકો છે ને એવી રીતે બાનું કાઢે કે કેન્યાના ગવર્મેન્ટ આમ કરે ને કેન્યાના ગવર્મેન્ટ કે આમ કરે. એટલે અમે તો મૂંઝાઈ ગયા છીએ કે આમ કઈ કરી ન શકતા. મારી મમ્મી ટ્રાય કરી નોકરી રાખવાની કેટલી કરી દીધી, એટલે મારા બાપે કરી જોઈશ કોઈ કઈ વસ્તુ નથી.
She tells that the British government says that the Kenyan governments, it depends on the Kenyan governments, and the Kenyan government says that it depends on the British government, so that we can't tell anything about it.
Everybody blames everybody else.
Yeah.
What does your mother find is the worst part about her being in Leicester and your father being in Kenya still?
खराब શું લાગે છે અહીંયા લેસ્ટરમાં લે પપ્પામાં
હા એને કે મમ્મીને ઘણી વાર કે છાતીમાં દુખી આવીને ઉપાધિ કરે ને તો
she worries about him very much. Sometimes he gets ill about it.
Hello? कौन बोला?
With the help of Radio Leicester, we arranged for Mrs. Amlani to speak to her husband for the first time since she came to England last May. Whether they talked about the political decisions that kept them apart, or about the trivia of everyday domestic life, for a few moments at least they felt like a family again. The right place for a husband is with his family, but the British government appears to think otherwise. These children don't understand the political reasons behind the 1968 Immigration Act. They don't understand why their father is not allowed to work in Kenya and was not allowed to come to England with them.
Hello, Papa. Josie bol.
Papa.
Josie bol.
Hi, Papa.
क्यों रोहित बोलूं?
Rohit bol.
जोशी बोल जे, okay?
Hello, Papa.
जोशी बोल.
Hello, Papa.
They can't tell him about lessons or games. They can't ask his advice or help. They haven't seen him for a year. It's possible they won't see him for another year. It's even possible that when they do meet, they won't recognise him. When you're 8 or 12 or 14, 2 years is a long time. In any case, it's a long time. Too long.
Vijay bolu chu. Kaun Vijay? हाँ. पास सही गया. हाँ. हाँ. तो सुधीर ना पूछो. हैं? सुधीर ना पूछो. Okay, thank you. सुधीर? हाँ. हाँ. क्या कौन? पूछो. હું સુધીર બોલું છું. હું સુધીર બોલું છું. હા સુધીર. હા. ઓકે બસ.
બે દિન જવાબ બોલે છે.
મમ્મી ના આપજે. હેલો.
હેલો.
હેલો કોણ?
હું લલિતા બોલું છું.
હા બધા છોકરા મજામાં છે ને?
હા બધા છોકરાને જોયું ને સાંભળ્યું ને? હા.
હા સારું આવજો બાય બાય.
Mr. Amlani.
Yes.
I'm Mr. Amlani. This is Jeremy James here, Man Alive, the BBC.
Hello.
Hello. Mr. Amlani, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Mr. Amlani, who do you blame for being separated from your family? Do you blame the British government for not letting you into England? Or do you blame the Kenyan government for not making it easier for you to work there?
As far as I think, it is the British government I blame.
Why?
Because it is their responsibility as they have given us the passport, and it's their responsibility to look after us.
Bearing in mind the fact in that case that you have a British passport but you were born in India but lived most of your life in Kenya, do you in fact feel British or Indian or Kenyan?
I feel British because at the time of getting the passport in Kenya, I was born in India, but I came to Kenya, then I was issued with a British passport.
Yes.
And I feel as a British, not as an Indian or Kenyan. I am as a British.
Excuse me, madam. We are for this Admit the British campaign, about those Indians who are in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. Have you heard about them? They are all British citizens? No. You haven't heard about them?
In Leicester, a group of Asians has been collecting signatures for a petition demanding a change in the immigration laws. Many of those approached don't understand the plight of the East African Asians, and many appear not to wish to learn. They reflect, in fact, a latent prejudice against all immigrants.
They are just living, some of them are nearly starving.
Yeah.
So, do you mind to sign this?
I don't really want to sign anything, thank you.
So, can you take this pamphlet with you?
Yeah,
You can read it later on so you understand the full facts.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A complicated legal puzzle must be explained to the indifferent in what is to the Asians a foreign language anyway.
Yeah, and even the African governments, they don't give them jobs. Even their children, they don't allow them in the schools. Even the wife.
Not in their own country?
No.
Well, that's what they ought to do.
Because they are British citizens, That's why we don't want them. Only the Britain will accept them. So that's the argument,
Oh,
so that's why what we are doing here is to send just a small petition to the British government about to admit them here. They are taking.
Well, their own country ought to have them, mate. They ought to be made to have them, aren't they?
Yeah, no, but in this world, only the paper counts. They are all citizens. Now you can't change them.
No.
Even my father, they went to the Indian High Commissioner to apply for the British Indian passport, I mean. They refuse him, you're a British citizen, you go to the England, that's all. Now, not
They
a
can't
single...
do them all here, can they?
You said...
For many white people, the East African Asian issue arouses a conflict between conscience and prejudice. There are those who think the barriers of prejudice are insurmountable, yet in one factory, at least in Leicester, Asian and English workmen can talk rationally and even tolerantly about the devalued passport.
On the other hand, it's just like you go and have your driving test. Passed, you get a license. And when you're driving on the road, a traffic officer comes and say, "Where is your license?" You showed him the license. And they say, they don't recognize that license. They say, "Oh, this is not valid." The same thing happened to us, They give us the passport, and they say, "Well, we don't know this passport." I can show you what it says, Well, you see, by Her Britannic Majesty Consul at Belgrade, these are to request and require in the name of Her Majesty all those whom it may consult, allow the bearer to pass freely without let or hindrance, and to afford the bearer such assistance as protection as they may be necessary,
Yeah.
So, well, and it is signed by the Queen.
I can quite understand this, but England at the moment, in my opinion, is in a pretty poor state, isn't it? We're not against you or anybody else. I mean, I said to you yesterday, I'm not bothered whether you're black, green or bloody blue.
Yeah.
It makes no difference to me. But the point is, we're letting so many people into England, you've got to get some sort of stop to it, or slow down, shall we say.
But, they made a mistake before. So if they knew they couldn't feed their own subjects, they shouldn't have produced the passport.
Yeah. They've made an example of the East Africans for political purposes. But when you look into the rights of their case, I'm sure you'd agree that they've got more rights to come to this country than lots of other people that are coming at the moment. Surely these should be the last people to be reduced, because they have got the right there, as it's pointed out. We enter into a contract. This is it. Now there's other people coming in, not only from the coloured people, but there's white people from all other countries all the way that are coming in every year that have got no right at all, basically. And if you're talking about numbers, if it's numbers you're worried about, well, surely this is the point at which you'd say, right, we'll reduce those for a while till the people that have got a British passport that are in this particular plight, let's give them the opportunity.
For those who've reached England either legally or illegally, it may seem their problems are over. They have jobs and, if not, social security. But they're only too aware that for the Asians left behind holding British passports, there are no jobs, and neither is there social security.
In England, those who are British, really British citizens, those who are jobless, the British government give them national assistance,
In Uganda, there are so many
there
unemployed.
are still British passport holders in Uganda, jobless for 1.5 years. They are about to starve. Is it not the responsibility of the British government to just give them little bit assistance, just to feed themselves, those hungry stomachs, This is the main thing, for the British government should look. And the whole world is laughing that you are forced to get this British passport. I say we are not forced, but we will just try to, see what the government does.
Why do you think the British government is behaving in the way that it is?
I don't know.
It's letting down their own citizens.
Yes. Because if they're going to let all of them come in straight, like thousands and thousands coming in all at the same time, how are they all going to get all this money that he's saying they're going to get? And the jobs, they can't afford to keep everybody around here.
Well, then if they don't give them jobs here, they should supply the national assistance, as he says, to the people living in East Africa.
But why can't people in Kenya do something about it? Why can't they afford little money to them?
Well, why? It is not their business.
I know it's not their business, but they can't all keep here. All of them, British government can't keep all of them around here.
What do you think is the basic problem for the Kenyan Asians?
If no job, that means no money. If no money, that means your kitchen won't work. And if the fire won't work, your stomach will burn inside. And if the stomach burns inside, you are nowhere and you may be under the soil, that's all.
Those who are British citizens, those who are jobless or who are starving at present, they must be allowed to come into Britain. That's the thing, we are just looking for. Even, my wife, she's in East Africa, she wrote to me so many times, still she writes, please do something, please do something. I say, I can't do anything. The laws are not in my hands. We'll have to wait till the decision comes. And she's now, she has lost her weight, really. If you see photograph, I can't even recognize that she is my wife, because she's worrying day and night.
One organisation in this country where East African Asians can expect help is run from a dingy two-roomed office in the East End of London. It was here 3 years ago that an organisation was set up to help all immigrants. Since the Commonwealth Immigration Act of 1968, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants has been mainly concerned with the East African Asians. It's tried to persuade the government to abolish the legislation restricting entry into Britain. Its secretary, Mary Dines, has encouraged Asians to lay complaints before the European Commission of Human Rights. So far, 4,000 have done so, but to Mary Dines the solution is simpler and nearer home.
Well, I'm in no doubt at all that those who want to come here, should be allowed to do this. They have got citizenship of the UK. You can fit in 10 elsewhere, 20 elsewhere, and some will go to India, the elderly people who don't expect to get work. But, I think it's a question of honour for Britain. It sounds a bit old-fashioned to say it, but we gave these people citizenship. We said we would honour it, and I think we simply have to do so, however inconvenient it may be now. The people who come now have no choice about where they live. They are absolutely destitute. They simply have to go to relatives in one of the areas where there are already other people from East Africa or India, and this is absolutely absurd. We're driving them into multiple occupation and into the areas who are least ready to receive them, because they're coming without any funds whatsoever.
Don't you think there's some sort of moral obligation on the Kenyan and Ugandan governments to do something about these people and not just wash their hands of the whole problem and say it's yours, the British government?
Well, I don't think so, because the people themselves, in many cases, could have taken the local citizenship at the time. The fact that they didn't and chose to remain British at British invitation is not Kenya's fault, is not Uganda's fault. I think that they've more than fulfilled their obligations by not deporting them. They could well throw them all out tomorrow, but they have tolerated this situation. I mean, no European country would tolerate 125,000 destitute British citizens living there for 2-3 years. I think that they have, more than fulfilled their obligations, if indeed they have any, to people who are non-citizens.